Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Game Week 13 team selection. Just quickly recapping Game Week 12, we had a great week there. Finally, a nice green arrow after, I believe, Game Week 10. So that sends us to around 333,000 something in the world. And that's a great sort of rank rise, 76 points, as I said. Again, finally doing the goods. I did make a transfer towards Lewis Hall. I was considering between Son to Saka versus Leaf Davis to Lewis Hall. Ultimately, because I was a little bit uncertain on Dunk's fitness, I thought that I just needed a defender anyways, because I wasn't really prepared to stare down playing two Man City defenders versus Liverpool at Anfield. So I did go for the Hall move. I was also a little bit more sure about Son's fitness than Saka's, although as it turns out, the minutes went exactly the opposite way. Saka played a lot more minutes than Son. Son clearly looked very fatigued, and that's going to be a big theme for the team selection this week and also next week if I keep Son. Before we jump into the team selection, I'd also like to shout out Fantasy Football Hub. They have a great deal in place right now, which is a fantasy green offer right now. So that's, I believe, 1 month free. So if you've been interested in using their tools, skeptical, I guess, on spending, have a look at the fantasy green offer. You can have a look at a free trial for a month. Use the advanced tools to help support a lot of the sort of advanced data that we have available, suggested transfers, anything that can really help you boost your rank and make better decisions in FPL. Have a look at that in the link in bio below. Now, quickly jumping into my Game Week 12 review, I think I just want to touch on key points. Palmer is an easy own, and Mbeumo is not so easy of an own because I think after Leicester at home, the games do get worse. This is around the time to consider selling him. His underlying data has also been really poor. So I think a lot of people might have been blinded, including myself, of course, in terms of his extremely good goal scoring at the start of the season. And that's gone cold. The underlying data continues to look really poor. They've had racked up a lot of poor matches in a row in terms of offense. At the beginning of the season, I even mentioned that Brentford, it looked like they actually improved on their offense. Although I think that's actually moved back around into their defense has actually improved a little bit. Offense has dropped off a little bit. Weiss and Mbeumo both dropping in terms of underlying stats. And clearly, I think both their returns were a little bit unsustainable, which is more than understandable given the amount of goals that they've scored without the underlying data to back it up. As far as Son, his minutes are declining, so he's a big concern for me. But this is a great game here, and it all really depends on that Europa League game, really, and the minutes, because they are playing versus a fearsome opponent. They have dropped some points within Europa League, but I do think that they have the bodies to actually bench Son and rest him for the more important match, which I think is still Fulham at home. As far as Salah and Rodgers, these are quite easy owns for the time being. But Rodgers also really unfortunately robbed from a Champions League goal tonight versus Juventus. If anyone has been watching, Salah was part of a great Liverpool effort to absolutely thwart Real Madrid. As far as the forwards, Solanke and Cunha did come good for me. Solanke, I think, even with an assist, even going back to Son, both Solanke and Son delivering in a really poor fixture on paper, although now we know, and I think now we expect, honestly, Man City to just be absolutely awful in defense. Is it absolutely the case that Man City are the worst defense in the Premier League? I don't think so. That's not necessarily what I'm thinking, but is the form suggesting that they are? When you're looking at the expected goals conceded in the last few key matches versus tough opponents, I mean, that could really be the case. So I do think that things can change with more injuries being worked on with Man City. We did see that John Stones was injured again, but other players are in training and getting a little bit more match fit, I would say, and getting up to full fitness. So Akanji, Ake, these players, including Diaz, who is in training, that sort of long-term impact, I think, will be nice on City when their fixtures get a little bit better. And I do think that they will return back to reasonable, respectable baselines. But the 5 losses in a row and the 6, games without a win, I think are very fair for City. Those are fair results. That's really how bad they are right now. And so that's really my team. I think when I look at it, the key big sort of glaring signs are no Saka, no João Pedro, and we'll talk about that in my transfers. Trent also seems like he was on the squad for the Real Madrid game, and we know that Bradley was struggling at the end there. Konate also got injured, so maybe that's actually a bit of a negative overall impact on Liverpool. Kelleher looked great, and Dunk was actually seen in training, so that's really my team for Game Week 12. Now, looking into Game Week 13, I think before we jump into actually the team selection, it's useful to probably share some of the data that we have for an FPL point of view. So Rob T, once again, our main man, has provided some of the data here when it comes to spread betting odds. You can follow him at Rob T in Blue Sky or on Twitter. I think he's a little bit more active on Blue Sky right now if people care. And ultimately, the data is really positive in the Arsenal direction. It's also, I think, the case that this Tottenham team is being really respected from the markets finally on offense. And a lot of people would like to see Tottenham as a clear team where they've been performing well in big games. They've let the ball drop really versus Crystal Palace and Ipswich, but I still think that we have to look at them and evaluate them as a very serious and respectable team, particularly on the offense. So no surprise that Spurs are actually our second best team here outside of Brighton, who are against a very, very poor opponent in Southampton here. So that's a big sign. Another sign that I like to point out too is Nottingham Forest a little bit lower than Brighton. And this is once again this sort of perspective and understanding that team, like your overall team attacking strength is not necessarily purely correlated to individual players, right? If there's a player who's much better at getting into good, consistent positions, Woods, for example, goal share is not going to be a share of that 1.8. It's going to be potentially higher than some of the other forwards in the league. So, for example, if we compare it to a Welbeck, for example, from the weekend, their goal share could be quite, or their expected goals could be quite similar, simply because they're different players who rack up different sorts of XG. I still think Welbeck is probably really good, so maybe that's not a great comparison, but Strand Larsen would be a good example, for example, on any game week where you have similar goals expected for the teams, but different sort of expected goals in terms of individual players because of how much XG a player tends to rack up or how much the markets are predicting when it comes to a certain player on a certain game week. So those are my thoughts right now. I think when it comes to my team, from a defensive point of view, clean sheets, I think it's very clear that I will be playing Lewis Hall. I think he played quite well. Not exactly a great game. It's Crystal Palace away anyways. Not that Crystal Palace have been great, but they did score 2 goals versus Aston Villa. And ultimately, it's just an away fixture where Newcastle haven't been performing super well in the league this season, but I've got 2 City defenders who I am reluctant to play. So that's quite simple. Brighton, an easy play with Dunk as long as he's available. So might be auto sub potential there. And when it comes to the rest of my defense, having to reluctantly play Flecken with a great game this week, hopefully with another chance of getting a clean sheet, and ultimately Gabriel, who did come off the Arsenal game with a knock. So we'll find out what happens there. My transfers will probably not center around Gabriel. I'm hoping that that injury is not serious, and I'm going to make this team selection video on the basis that it's not serious. But clearly Arsenal, you want to get a big bite of that clean sheet share, because ultimately the Arsenal run of games is really, really good because of how highly we rate the defense. I think it's still a little bit better than Liverpool's in terms of just evaluating the fixture quality. So when we know that Konate is injured, a lot of the players to sort of jump into from an Arsenal point of view are also quite cheap when it comes to, let's say, players like Timber with the white injury. So those are things to look at and consider. Other than that, I think moving on quickly towards my midfield, I will quite easily play a back 3 alongside a midfield 4. So the way it's going to work is I'm going to play all my home players. I'm going to bench Rodgers at Chelsea away. Chelsea have been still, for the most part, a pretty poor defense, I would say. They've probably dropped off that little bit of quality in terms of defense so that they can actually have what is an elite offense within the league, but it's still an Aston Villa game, so it's tougher. But Palmer's definitely here, and Mbumo's here, Son's here, and Salah's here. So the big consideration that a lot of people have already probably, made this decision over is whether to go Son to Saka. And I really do think that Son is going to be rested for the Europa League match. I think he'll probably come off the bench. If I'm wrong, and I think I'm already concerned about Son's minutes on that basis, I will be pulling the trigger towards going from Son to Saka. It's not ideal. I'm moving from a home fixture to an away fixture. Clearly, Fulham are a much better team than West Ham, so there's a bit of a leeway there. But ultimately, I don't think I really want to be making a move like this on this game week. I think that it's a close move. It's a luxury move. I don't really feel the need to do that, and I really want to rack up 2 free transfers as well. I do want to continue to monitor Son's fitness ultimately, but we are about to step into a December period that's going to be super busy for all players. Son is actually involved in 3 competitions right now as well, compared to Saka, who's involved in 2, and clearly the younger and fitter player, considering that he can go from injury and back to full fitness a lot faster than Son can, and Son has so far this season. He also maybe will, not be, I guess, abused as much as Son would be within a regular international break, just because Son is someone who does have to travel to Asia, usually does play 90 minutes a game, and suffers, I think, the same consequences of any player traveling to South America, for example, and dealing with the ramifications of international break football there. So that's a big consideration for me. And as I said, if anyone's actually watching the video, you will know that I'm very likely to pull that trigger if Son starts, for example, the Europa League, because that's going to probably mean more minutes than I would have expected. And Saka, I just think, is the fitter player. He played the full match versus Sporting, which was actually against my expectation. He was meant to be subbed off in that Sporting game, but ultimately, because of the Gabriel knock, it ended up being that the last Arsenal substitution, the 5th Arsenal substitution, was actually Gabriel for Kyrier, I believe, as opposed to Saka coming off the field, which, is not ideal, I guess, for Saka's fitness, but it's a positive, I guess, if you already see him as an extremely fit player. As far as the forward line this week, I am going to be playing Wood versus Ipswich at home, Solanke versus Fulham at home, and Cunha versus Bournemouth at home. The big miss here is clearly João Pedro, and I do really think that it doesn't make too much sense. It's another luxury transfer, but Wood to João Pedro is something that's also within my consideration. I don't think there's anything really wrong with Wood. We know that Wood missed out on the previous match from a start due to this sort of international break fatigue. He's also one of those players playing within the Oceanic region, so that has an impact in terms of his health. And I think it was prioritized clearly, given that the Arsenal fixture was a very tough fixture for Nottingham Forest, that he would come off the bench instead. And he didn't have a great impact there, but that's not really the game we wanted Wood for. We wanted Wood for Ipswich at home. I still think I'm probably going to keep Wood for Ipswich at home. Cunha's gotten a lot of price rises, and I do really want to see Cunha out up until Ipswich at home. So if there's any player within my team right now that I think could actually be a transfer out to João Pedro, I do think it's Wood on this game week. If not, I can see myself probably ignoring João Pedro up until at least next week or game week 15, because the way I see my team, given that I'm implying that I'm going to roll right now, it makes a lot more sense for me to leave available Son to Saka on game week 14, and then maybe using 2 free transfers, I can go back into João Pedro in game week 15 and use the surplus cash somewhere else within FPL. And I think that's sort of the general plan that I'll have. There's going to be price change impacts, and I think that's part of the reason why I went into Lewis Hall. That move from Leif Davis to Lewis Hall actually netted me back 0.1 million. So it gives me a little bit of a kind of buffer to make decisions in the future and not sort of be completely dictated by price changes and pressures there. I like the idea that Son is going to have relatively low ownership. Wood to João Pedro is actually a different move, though, because I kind of think that I'm buying into João Pedro's lower ownership, even though that's rising, considering that Wood's ownership is already quite high within the game. And once again, it speaks back to the idea that I do think I made a mistake in Game Week 12. I think everyone can sort of admit that sometimes they make mistakes. I do think the Wood move was probably a bit of an overestimation on my part in terms of how far behind, I guess, João Pedro was in terms of his injury and recovery process. I was wrong there. Happy to be wrong, and I said I was wrong last week. But I still think I can keep Wood for this game week and see him out there, because I also think that Wood is just a bench next week as well, where we said that we're going to play someone like Rodgers, and I'd probably even play Rodgers next week over João Pedro as well, given that I think Fulham away is most often a tough fixture, right? A lot of people did bench Cunha for that exact reason versus Fulham away, and I still think that's a huge aberration. Part of, I guess, the huge impact on that game was the Anderson injury as well, but Cunha has been absolutely brilliant this season, and he's overperformed a lot of his numbers. But once again, I think to an unsustainable rate, so people shouldn't just have crazy lofty expectations of Cunha, but the reality is the run of games is really good. So supporting the idea that he's going to give returns here, I think would still generally make sense. So that's really going to be my team selection for this week. A lot of home fixtures. I believe only 2 away fixtures for my team. The big question mark is going to be on captaincy versus vice captaincy here. A lot of things have changed. A lot of our estimations continuing to move as well. Salah, for example, I'm sure is going to be someone that a lot of managers will be considering as a big transfer this game week, because a lot of people are still trying to move out of Haaland, and I completely understand that. But that also, with Man City playing so poorly in defense, has put into question whether or not we should consider the idea of Salah as a captain. Now, I myself am still tempted to play the fixture here technically and go for Palmer as my captaincy and vice captaining Mbeumo, because I can't really guarantee Son's fitness. I can't guarantee Saka's fitness technically, but I think Saka's probably going to play more minutes. So if I even do a move like Son to Saka, I don't see myself really captaining or vice captaining Saka. I think Salah is a pretty decent vice captain for this week, but I do like the upside of a Palmer captaincy. Looking at the spread odds as well from our main man Rob T, I think that that's supported as well. Salah's a lot closer on the spread odds than some of the expected points models that I've seen, but Palmer for me is the clear leading candidate. We know that he's a player who does get the rest within the European games. Clearly, I think Salah will play the full extent of this game because it's Man City. Saka, I think, less so comfortable about that, because he also played a lot more minutes, and I think Arteta probably would have imagined that he wanted to within the midweek European game. So I really do like the idea here of a Palmer captaincy. But as I said, I think players like Mbeumo, players like Salah and Saka are not bad as vice captains. And if you really want to captain them, I think go for it. I just like the idea of going for Palmer here, the better captain. And I think a captain that actually a lot of people will willfully ignore because he's also been blanking recently. But I still think I'm comfortable within the baselines that Palmer has set this season. And I do think he's a very logical captain. But as I said, very close between a lot of leading options. And that's really it. That's going to be my team selection here for Gameweek 13. Thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you soon. Take care and goodbye.